Imagine your own blood, your only sister, secretly visiting a native doctor to strike you with paralysis, all because of greed, jealousy, and the desire to steal your husband. A betrayal so deep, it shakes the hills of Bamenda. This is not just a story. It is a painful reminder that sometimes, the greatest enemies hide within our own families. Before we continue, please subscribe to my channel. I beg you in the name of God. Your subscription helps these powerful stories reach more people so they can learn, reflect, and be warned. On Mission Road, in a small rented compound with a zinc roof and a mango tree that dropped fruit every August, lived Mama Josephine and her 2 daughters. Mama Josephine had buried her husband at 32, a good man taken too soon. She had stood at his graveside with 6-year-old Susan holding her right hand and 4-year-old Linda holding her left, and made a silent promise to the sky. These children will not suffer. She kept that promise with her back. She woke before the sun, sowed vegetables, washed other people's clothes, plaited hair under a kerosene lamp, and somehow made sure her daughters ate, went to school, and had uniforms without holes. Neighbors respected her. She was the kind of woman that communities quietly depend on without ever fully saying so. Susan and Linda grew up side by side, eating from the same pot, sleeping under the same roof, breathing the same cool Bamenda air. But from the beginning, they were growing in different directions. Susan's mind was always working, always asking why and then finding the answer herself. Her teacher Mr. Tony used to say, that Susan Josephine, that child will be something. Mark my words. She won prizes, passed exams, and never carried her intelligence like a trophy. She helped Linda with homework every evening, patiently explaining, drawing diagrams, breaking things down. Linda would chew her pencil and say she was tired, and Susan would sigh and close her book. We'll continue tomorrow. Tomorrow always became never. But Susan never gave up on her sister. That was simply not who she was. Linda was not stupid. She was sharp with people, quick to read a room, and had a memory for faces and names that Susan envied. But sitting in a classroom made her feel like a caged thing. By Form 3 she had made her decision. She came home one afternoon and dropped her school bag on the floor with finality. Mama, I am not going back to school. The silence that followed was so heavy that even the mango tree outside seemed to stop moving. Mama argued, cried, brought a pastor, brought every story she could find about women who regretted dropping out. Linda listened with the patient expression of someone who has already made up their mind. In the end, Mama let her go to Auntie Perpetua's tailoring shop. Linda was genuinely gifted with fabric, her hands were patient with cloth in a way they had never been with textbooks. For a while, things seemed like they might work out. But Linda had one serious problem. Her tongue. She insulted customers, quarreled with neighbors, fought with the tomato seller for 3 weeks over nothing. Men came and went, Linda was pretty, there was no denying that, but every man who came close enough to see past the face eventually encountered the tongue and quietly disappeared. The years passed. Linda's mates were marrying, moving, building. Linda was still in the same spot. And every time someone mentioned Susan's name, something in her chest tightened like a fist. Susan graduated from the University of Beer Faculty of Medicine on a Thursday afternoon in June. Mama Josephine wore her best wrapper and sat in the front row with tears running freely down her face. When they called Susan's name, Mama stood up in the crowd and shouted, "Thank you, Jesus," so loudly that people around her laughed and clapped. It was one of the happiest moments of Mama Josephine's life. Linda was not there. She sent a text that said, "Congratulations," nothing else. Susan called her that evening anyway. "Linda, I'm a doctor." "Yes," Linda said. "Well done." And hung up. The hospital where Susan began her internship was large, busy, and full of the energy of a place where life and death negotiate daily. Hans Abubakar was a senior doctor, already known for his clinical precision and uncommon patience with patients. Susan noticed him first because of something small. She walked past the ward and heard his voice, calm and unhurried, explaining a procedure to a frightened elderly woman. Not showing off. Just making sure she wasn't afraid. This man, Susan thought, has a good heart. Hans noticed Susan the way a person notices someone who pays attention to things the same way you do. 6 months later he took her hand and said, "I think I want to spend my life with you. And I don't want to waste time pretending otherwise." Susan looked at this steady, kind, serious man and said, "It is not too soon." They were married a year later at the Catholic Church in Bamenda. Hans's family came from the north, Muslim, respectful, warm. There was a beautiful meeting of words that day. Mama Josephine danced until her niece told her to stop. Linda sat at the family table in a dress she had made herself, the most beautiful dress at the reception, and smiled whenever someone looked at her. When no one was looking, she watched Hans with an expression nobody thought to read carefully. Nobody was watching Linda. That was the first mistake. Susan and Hans built a life together deliberately and carefully. Their home was comfortable without being excessive. They cooked together on Sunday evenings, prayed together, talked about their days even when tired. Susan was also saving quietly, a small portion of every paycheck, building toward her dream of opening a clinic in Bamenda one day. Life was genuinely good. And then Linda called. "Susan, I need a change. Things are not moving for me here. I want to come to the city and open a proper shop. I just need a starting point." Susan called Mama afterward. Mama's voice was careful. "Susan, you know your sister. You have a home. You have a husband. And Linda has ways. I don't want trouble in your house. Mama, she is my sister. I cannot turn my back on her." A long silence. Then, "Promise me you will be watchful. Not suspicious, watchful. There is a difference." "I promise, Mama." Susan kept her promise for about 3 weeks. After that, life got busy and the watching quietly stopped. Linda arrived with 2 large suitcases and a smile so warm that Susan almost laughed at her earlier concern. The first weeks were beautiful. Linda helped around the house, cooked Mama's no recipe so well that Hans had 2 helpings and declared it the best he'd eaten outside a proper Cameroonian restaurant. Susan felt relief spread through her like warm water. She helped Linda find a shop space, co-signed the lease, gave her money for materials, and introduced her to hospital staff wives who needed a good tailor. For 6 weeks everything was exactly what Susan had hoped. Then something shifted. So gradually that Susan couldn't name the moment it started. Just small wrong things. Like a smell you can't locate. The way Linda's laughter became louder when Hans was in the room. The way she found reasons to linger when Hans was making tea. The way she started doing her hair bigger and more elaborate on days she knew Hans would be home. One Saturday Susan left for a hospital emergency and came back early to find Linda on the sofa in a very small dress, sitting close to Hans, showing him something on her phone. Linda looked up and for just a fraction of a second, before the smile replaced it. There was something dark and calculating in her eyes that disappeared so fast Susan could not be sure she'd seen it. "Susan, you're back early. Hans was just keeping me company, I can see," Susan said, smiling, kissing Hans on the cheek. "Come on the outside." Heart doing something complicated in her chest. That night she tried carefully to raise it with Hans. He looked at her directly. "If something is concerning you, tell me clearly." "It's nothing," Susan said. And went to sleep. She almost called Mama but stopped herself. It was probably stress. She resolved to be more attentive at home. None of those resolutions were enough for what was coming. Linda stood in her shop one evening after closing, staring at nothing. She had tried every approach. The dresses, the proximity, the laughter, every opportunity when Susan was away. Hans was polite, consistent, and entirely unmoved. He was the dangerous kind of faithful, not faithful because he had no options, but because he had chosen someone and saw no reason to look elsewhere. That kind of man was almost impossible to move. Almost. Linda got into a taxi and gave the driver an address on the outskirts of town that he recognized immediately and did not comment on. Down a dirt road, past banana trees, through a rusted gate. The old man who lived there was not remarkable looking except for his eyes, the particular stillness of someone who had walked in darkness for decades and no longer found it uncomfortable. Linda sat down and stated her business without shame. I want a man who is married to my sister. The old man looked at her for a long time. This will cost you. In money. And in other ways. I don't care, Linda said. He warned her clearly. The thing I give you must not be found. If it is found, what has been sent will return to its sender. And it will not come back gently. Do you understand? I understand, Linda said. He made her repeat it. She did. Flatly. Like someone who has decided they don't need to be afraid. He gave her a small dark clay pot, sealed. She was told where to put it and what it would do. She drove home and placed it under her bed before Susan and Hans returned from their evening walk. It began on a Tuesday. Susan woke up and put her feet on the floor and the floor felt very far away. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. She told herself she was tired. By Thursday she was walking with visible difficulty. By the following Monday she needed the wall every time. Hans ran every test they could think of, blood work, neurological assessments, imaging. Everything came back normal. There was nothing wrong with Susan on paper. But she was getting worse. Within a month, Dr. Susan Josephine, who had operated in theaters for 7 hours at a stretch, could not walk from her bedroom to the kitchen without falling. A wheelchair arrived. Hans hired a nurse. And Linda stepped in to help. Cheerfully. Selflessly. Always making sure Hans noticed every single thing she did. Hans, you should rest. I'll take care of Susan tonight. Hans, you have been working so hard. Let me cook for you. Hans, exhausted and frightened, began to accept the help. And slowly, in ways he could not see from the inside, he began to change. He stopped sitting with Susan in the evenings. Stopped holding her hand. Stopped calling her name with warmth. Linda was everywhere, warm and available and present in the way that water finds the shape of whatever it's poured into. Susan lay in her room listening to the sounds of her house and felt herself being erased from her own life. She prayed every single day. God, I don't understand what is happening. But I am still here. I am still here. Linda moved through the house like someone who had already signed the lease. She went through Susan's papers, found the savings account, began making small withdrawals. She took one of the cars. She redecorated the living room. She moved into a bigger wardrobe. Hans, fogged, nodded to everything. Susan heard all of it from her room and felt something settle past anger, past grief, into a cold strange place in her chest. She called her mother more and more. Tried to keep her voice normal. But one evening she called and just held the phone to her ear without speaking, and Mama Josephine said quietly from the other end, Susan. What is happening in that house? And Susan cried. The kind of crying held back too long. Mama. Something is very wrong. I don't know what it is. But something is very wrong. I am coming, Mama said. Mama, don't, Susan. I am coming. Before Mama could arrange transport, Hans called his own meeting. He rang Mama Josephine and asked her to come. His voice was formal in a way that made her stomach drop. She arrived on a Wednesday. The living room had new curtains, new cushions, Linda's choices. Mama noticed everything and said nothing. She sat with her rosary. Hans sat across from her. Linda sat slightly to his side. Susan was in the bedroom and had not been told there was a meeting. Hans cleared his throat. Mama, I want to speak honestly. Susan has been ill for months. Nothing is found. She cannot perform her duties as a wife. She is your wife, Mama said quietly. In sickness and in health. I know those words. But I am human. And I have developed genuine feelings for Linda. I want to marry her, Mama. I am not hiding it. I am telling you directly. The room went very still. Mama's rosary stopped moving in her fingers. You want to marry your wife's sister? While your wife is ill in the next room. Hans began to explain, tradition, precedent, his grandfather who had married 2 sisters. Hans Abubakar, stop. He stopped. Mama Josephine stood up. Not tall, but standing as though adding inches from somewhere inside herself. I want to see my daughter. The bedroom smelled of quiet neglect. Bedclothes overdue for changing. A plate of food untouched on the nightstand. Susan was lying facing the window. She had the door open and didn't turn. She had stopped expecting good things to come through that door. Then she heard her mother's shoes on the floor. A sound she had been hearing since she was 4 years old. She turned. Mama crossed the room in 4 steps and put both arms around Susan, and Susan broke completely. Every locked-away thing came open: her legs, her house, her husband, her money, her sister, the loneliness of being sick in your own home and treated like furniture. Mama held her and rocked her and said nothing. There was only holding. After a long time, Mama pulled back, looked around the room carefully, helped Susan lie down, straightened the bedclothes, opened the window. Rest. I am going to clean this house properly. Then she went to Linda's room. She found it when she lifted Linda's mattress to top the sheet. A black spiritual pot, smaller than she expected for something that had done so much damage. Dark clay, sealed, sitting in the shadows. Mama Josephine stood still for a moment. She had been a Catholic since she was 7 years old. She had prayed through her husband's death, through 20 years of single motherhood, through every dark stretch life had offered. She had developed a faith that was not abstract or theoretical, it was personal, specific, and battle-tested. She recognized this for what it was. She did not scream. She reached under the bed with steady hands, picked up the pot, and felt the wrongness of it humming against her palms. She was not afraid. She set it on the floor, took out her rosary, and prayed. Not quickly. A long, deliberate, authoritative prayer, the prayer of a woman who knows exactly who she is speaking to. She named every person in that house by name. She spoke over her daughter's legs, her marriage, her money, her life. Then she raised the pot above her head. In the name of Jesus Christ, I break this. She brought it down on the tile floor. It shattered. A smell came out, something with no right words, that lasted seconds and then vanished. The air in the whole house felt suddenly lighter. Cleaner. Like every window had been opened at once. She swept every fragment, bagged it, put it outside, and washed her hands 3 times. Hans was mid-consultation when it happened. One moment his mind was as it had been for months, thick, clouded, like seeing through dirty glass. The next moment the glass was clear. And the first clear thought that arrived was, Susan. He stood up so abruptly his patient stuttered. He wrote the prescription in 30 seconds, walked out of the hospital, stood in the parking lot in the afternoon heat, and felt a realization arrive fully formed and terrible like a building falling. What have I done? He drove home fast. Mama Josephine was standing in the living room as though she had been waiting. She told him everything. About the taxi ride to the outskirts of town. About the pot under the bed. About what she had found in his house, in his wife's room. Hans listened. He was a man of science, with degrees on 3 walls and published papers. And sitting there, he knew, in the way people know things that cannot be measured, that every word was true. Because the alternative was that he had chosen this freely. And he knew himself. He knew who he was. He put his face in his hands and slid off the chair and sat on the floor and wept in a way he had not wept since his mother died. Mama Josephine let him cry. After a long time she said quietly, "Get up. Go to your wife." Hans stood in the bedroom doorway. Susan was facing the window. "Susan." She turned. And in his face she saw something she had been watching live for months. Now back, all at once, like a light turned on in a room dark too long. He crossed the room and sat on the floor beside her bed, not on the bed, on the floor, as though the chair wasn't appropriate for this, and took her hand. "I don't know how to explain what happened to me. But I know I love you. That I have only ever loved you. And what has been allowed to happen to you in this house," his voice broke. "Susan, I am so sorry." Susan looked at him for a long time. Then she placed her hand on top of his. "I know," she said. "Not it's okay, it was not okay. But I know." And he understood what that meant. Linda was in a boutique downtown, laughing with friends, showing off a bag bought with Susan's money, when it happened. She forgot what she was laughing at. Then she forgot where she was. She looked around the boutique and could not place it. Her companions noticed. "Linda, are you okay?" She looked at them and could not find their names. She walked out onto the street and stood on the pavement looking up and down the road for something she could not name. She began speaking to people no one else could see, in a mixture of languages and sounds that were not language at all. Someone in the crowd recognized her and called Hans. She was found 20 minutes later standing in the middle of the road, her expensive bag at her feet, shoes abandoned on the pavement, her eyes clear and distant and elsewhere. The native doctor had been very specific. If it is found, what has been sent returns to its sender. And it will not return gently. He had not lied. Susan's recovery was not instantaneous. It came like dawn, not like a light switch. First her toes. Then her ankles. Then she could bear weight for a few seconds. A minute. Then 5. Hans was there for all of it, holding her hands while she tried to stand, lifting her without comment when she fell, helping her try again. Mama stayed 3 weeks. She cooked every day, prayed every morning, sat with Susan in the evenings and talked the way mothers and daughters talk when they have survived something together. One morning, 2 weeks after the pot was broken, Susan walked from the bedroom to the kitchen without holding anything. Hans turned from the stove and saw her standing there on her own 2 feet, and the expression on his face was one she kept in her memory like a photograph. The overwhelming relief of a person who has nearly lost something and hasn't. He crossed the kitchen and held her. She held him back. Mama Josephine went back to Bamenda on a Thursday. At the door she held Susan's face in both hands and looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "The enemy came from inside your own house. From your own blood. You kept that door open because you are good. Don't let this make you hard. But wisdom is also a gift from God. You can love someone and still know what they are. You can pray for someone and still lock your door. These things are not contradictions." She kissed her daughter's forehead. God was watching the whole time. When the room was dark and you were crying and no one came, He was watching. And He sent me. She picked up her bag, adjusted her wrapper. "Call me when you get your clinic." Susan laughed, the first real laugh in months. Yes, Mama. Mama Josephine walked down the path, turned once at the gate, then walked into the ordinary bright morning, rosary in her pocket, all the way back to Mission Road, back to her mango tree, back to her small flower garden at the entrance. The flowers were still there. They always were. Susan was not wrong to love her sister. Love that waits to see if people deserve it first is not love, it is business. But Linda's story is worth examining honestly. She did not become what she became overnight. She became it slowly, through every moment she chose envy over gratitude, resentment over joy. The charm only accelerated what had already been growing in her heart for years. And Hans shows us that even the best, most faithful people can be moved when the right darkness finds the right crack. His recovery required humility, grief, and the willingness to sit on the floor and weep, and then get up and rebuild. And Mama Josephine shows us what a praying mother is truly made of. Not someone who recites words, but someone whose faith is a walking tool. Who goes into dark places without fear. Who cleans what is dirty, breaks what is evil, and then stays to cook soup, because love is both a prayer and a pot on the stove. The greatest weapon against darkness is a faithful person who shows up unannounced.